We're up to step 2 in the calculation of your F statistic for an ANOVA. We have to calculate now the mean square error values, and now that we've calculated the sum of square values, calculating mean square error is very straightforward. We've determined that the sum of squares within for this problem is 90.9, the sum of squares between is 43.8, and the sum of squares total is 134.70. And notice that the sum of squares within and between are additive, and once again, if you calculate separately as we did in the previous example, sum of squares total, it's a good check to make sure that your sum of squares within and between are correct. Now, in order to calculate mean square error values, we do need to know also the degrees of freedom within and degrees of freedom between. And we looked at those values in a previous step, and just to remind you of that, degrees of freedom within is calculated by simply subtracting the number of groups from the total sample size. Total sample size, that is big N, all of the groups added together in this example is 30. Minus k, the number of groups is 3. 30 minus 3 is 27. That's your degrees of freedom within. Degrees of freedom between is calculated by simply subtracting 1 from the total number of groups. 3 minus 1 is 2, so the degrees of freedom between is 2. So with these values, we have everything we need to know to be able to calculate the mean square error values for within and between. Mean square error values within are calculated by dividing the sum of squares within by the degrees of freedom within. So if you take sum of squares within, in this example, is 90.9 divided by degrees of freedom within 27, you get 90.9 divided by 27, 3.37. We'll round that to. Okay. And if we do, we want to now know the mean square error value between groups, and you take sum of squares between divided by degrees of freedom between, so that is simply 43.8 divided by 2. .9. Right. Easy, right? So our mean square error value within is 3.37, mean square error value between 21.9. And now you're ready for the last step, calculate your F statistic.